Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, How to Set Up a Cannabis Cultivation Operation Post-Legalization in Mexico. I am Jorge Rubio. I am very happy to be here. I would like to say thank you to Training Smart Rural Mexico and Helio Spectra. Thanks to Jorge, Araceli, Ryan, Sara for this webinar and this excellent organization. If you have any questions, please go to the questions panel to make some questions and to have a chat with us. This webinar is trying to talk about what is a legal cultivation framework and aspects of how to do that in US and Mexico. Cannabis Academia is an educational project with real experts of the industry. We'll have more webinars and partners in the coming weeks. As you may know, the Mexican Supreme Court declared cannabis prohibition unconstitutional. I see a very positive action in terms of human rights, but too far for a creation and development of a full legal cannabis and hemp industry. Nothing changed if the source of cannabis is the same. Nothing changed if the source of cannabis is the same for activists, which are more interested in their own enthusiasm than the potential of a regulated industry. Nothing changed if the policymakers have a short vision and they don't make amendments to the COFEPRIS and the Minister of Agriculture for the next legislative period. The Mexican cannabis industry is much more than a smoke a joint in Reforma Avenue. Access to legal medical and adult use products is one of the most important things when you are trying to regulate this complex industry. My years in the Canadian and US industry give me an opportunity to learn and understand the challenges faced for many jurisdictions around the world. That is why education and information like this webinar will help entrepreneurs, policymakers, students, journalists, and cannabis enthusiasts. You are very welcome to be here. And we have an excellent panelist. Ryan Wankel is a multiple Cannabis Cup Award winner, second generation grower with more than 28 years of cultivation experience. Respected global leader, member of the Cultivation Advisory Committee with the National Cannabis Industry Association, as well as the Science and Sustainability and Energy for the Cannabis Certificate Council. He is a cannabis licensed grower at Helio Spectra. Welcome, Ryan, to be here in this webinar.
Hola, hello, bonjour, aloha. Thank you very much for joining. It is my absolute pleasure to be here today, and hopefully I can, assist anybody in this what sometimes sees to be a confusing journey of cannabis regulation and cultivation, and hopefully can make it a little bit easier and attainable. Thanks, Jorge. As Jorge says, my name is Ryan Wankel. I'm located in Denver, Colorado. I'm a second generation cannabis grower who grew in multiple cannabis production facilities from 2009 to 2015. I currently work as the cannabis grower liaison for Helio Spectra. Helio Spectra is an LED lead lamp company, which has started in 2006 by two plant scientists with one common goal, and it was understanding how light affects different plants at different stages of growth. So very early on, we've always focused on horticultural lighting for crop production, and cannabis being one of those crops. I've started working with Helio Spectra in 2015, and as Jorge has pointed out, a multiple High Times Cannabis Cup Award winner, and hopefully we'll share some of those techniques today. I must say, I do apologize. Lo siento, yo no hablo español. So the webinar will be in English, and please feel free to utilize the chat function there if you have any questions on some of the topics that I might discuss, and we will be doing a Q&A at the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ryan. So, how will you set up cultivation practice? Tell us about what are some steps you take to ensure you to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, that's I'd say it's a very common question and not necessarily the easiest to be able to answer. I say the first thing that really you should be looking at, which you kind of related and discussed here at the beginning, was regulations. Regulations, of course, in being in the legal cannabis production, legal cannabis, that you do have to abide by a lot of regulations. Sometimes you'll be dealing, with federal regulations, but also local regulations. We have found that, you know, not only do have a larger law that's put in place, but it can depend on geographically where you're located. Particularly, some regions might be, against uh, distribution or sale. Some places might be open to, that and cultivation. So regulations will start to dictate a lot on how you're actually designing and the type of space that you're actually utilizing. One other thing, so, and that kind of sets the trend of, outdoor versus an indoor versus a greenhouse. And really, when we talk about, greenhouse and indoor, we kind of lump it into what we call as controlled environmental agriculture, or CEA. And it's definitely a common term, and it is really when you're starting to control all of those parameters. And sometimes, with Mexico having such deep roots in the agriculture world, and particularly in a lot of food production, and I always say that, Mexico is one of those countries that feeds the world. That there are, prime conditions when it comes to, professional horticulturists and people who've been doing agriculture for multiple generations. There's ideal land, when it comes to even some outdoor cultivation aspects. That there are these, prime locations located throughout, Mexico, whether, from Chiapas and Oaxaca, and there's all of these regions that are prime for high cannabis cultivation. Regulations will start to, dictate sometimes whether people are growing in indoor or outdoor type space. So we see a lot of trends of going with more of a controlled environmental agricultural approach, being able to control all of the environmental parameters that cannabis needs for high quality production. And that's where you'll start to see that if you're looking as a business to produce a high quality product, depending on your customers, which is very, very important when it comes to what space that you're looking to have, that we do find a high, when it comes to a medicinal, smokable medicinal product for the consumer, we see, where we do start to see an indoor or a more controlled environmental agricultural approach. Another, thing we really see of, developing a space in your, in an indoor environment, again with regulations, is security. Cannabis is, it's a pretty high profit margin crop. That security can be, of course, at a risk. So you do start to see, more controlled environmental agricultural, again, talking about greenhouses or an indoor structure, that it can provide a higher level of security. And that can start to dictate, your space considerations, when it comes to regulations. Also, plant count, depending on as these regulations start to roll out, and as Jorge says, I think that there will be a lot of adopting different regulations and tracking methods when it comes to the actual production methods, and going from growing the crop to then being able to distribute it to patients and how that, and those regulations will all begin to roll out. But that will also take into consideration how you might be able to uh, develop, design, retrofit a particular growing facility indoor. So there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to developing those spaces, but it is one of the first starts and processes of this.
Thank you. So tell us about what is your advice for those who are looking to design their facility? And I mean, what are the first steps when you're trying to grow cannabis in a closed space, in an indoor place or in a greenhouse? For you, which are the first steps it is important to have this overview in Mexico, because it is some people say in Mexico that it is really easy to grow cannabis because the weather, the sun, the characteristics of our environment. But I have some doubts talking about that.
Yeah, that's and it's really good. It's very valid doubts to have. Obviously, cannabis, and especially when we're looking at a medicinal aspect, or even at a recreational level, it is a consumed good from people, and that even it is a high profit margin. Typically, the high profit becomes with quite frankly, a larger investment at the very beginning when you're doing something, I would say, correctly into the cannabis space. That although that there's these good, you've talked about the sun, there's really great soil in these particular spots, but then we're talking of post harvest, or when we're talking about post production, we're talking about how that plant dries and matures and goes to consumption, to the consumer. And it's very important when you're starting any business of understanding who is your customer, who is your consumer. That will start to dictate the kind of level of quality of cannabis, because it does gauge of the quality of cannabis from very low cost production to a very high quality controlled in an indoor space. And again, when you're going with an indoor space and you are producing a medicinal and consumable product, I think that there will be a lot of a lot of similarities between the markets we see in the United States, which we started to see Canada adapt and adopt and start to modify. And I think that we're going to also see that modification in Mexico, where we start to see some of these regulations come into place. So really the first thing that I always, people ask me, do I get a head grower? I'm not cultivating any plants right now. I don't even have the space. Do I get a head grower? I think that it's a very important aspect. It's not, I'd say that's not it's the first thing. You want to make very strategic and smart business, but having a head grower working with the right partners. Again, we are we provide lead lamprey, and but we really pride ourselves at Heliospectra to have that additional support, working really closely with your engineer, your head grower. So forming these partnerships is really key to success. I think, and you could see that, I think, from any business, but within the cannabis industry, it's very particularly important to find the right partners, find that grower that works well with an engineer. Typically, you might be utilizing a local engineer. That head grower is going to provide, a large amounts of insights when it comes to, your fertigation and what nutrients that you're going to be providing. That specific design and layout of each of the rooms, we find, that we recommend having separate rooms for the vegetative stage versus the flowering stage of the plant. We find that it basically can speed up your production. You're mitigating any sort of risk of contaminations, because regulations, and again, it could be with particularly building codes, you know, how that plant is, you know, what we say being tracked. You will hear when you're getting into this seed to sale, and you know, it is a computer kind of digital database that, you know, each plant is tracked from its clone. Particularly, you know, again, comes down, we see the industry utilizing clones rather than seeds. Some beginning, you know, beginning a business, you might have to, your regulations might say that you have to start from a seed. We see, you know, different regulations in different markets that say you can only get your plants from this producer, and that's what you have to use because it's in the legal system. So there are, you know, tracking that you'll have to be able to utilize, which is very important. So having the head grower, finding these partners early on, utilizing data-driven decisions is key for success. In understanding all of that works hand in hand with who your customer might be, is really very, very important, because that will start to dictate, you know, how many rooms that you start to set up. You know, understanding that, you know, the veg is going to be different from your flowering, and then not only, you know, and that can come down to, of course, your lighting design, and that different spectrums of light are going to give you different results at different stages of growth. So we really like to look at light. We always break down light into, with cannabis, really into 3 simple things. Light in the photo period. Photo period is simply how long that lamp is on and how long that lamp is off. Cannabis is a short day plant, which means that it takes a longer period of darkness to induce flowering. So of course, the closer you get to the, you know, equatorial regions, and especially in, you know, southern Mexico, you know, you were getting pretty close to, you know, 12 hours of sun and 12 hours of darkness almost all year long. And the closer that you get to these equatorial regions, you are really looking at a photo period of, you know, 12 hours of when the sun is out and 12 hours of darkness. And cannabis, and cannabis is very light sensitive. That 12 hours or longer period of darkness than when the lights are on is essential for stable cannabis production. The last thing that, you know, if you have any sort of, we say, light leaks or light coming into that dark period or environment, can be very troublesome for cannabis. Of course, when it comes to basically any sort of hermaphroditic or essentially that being detrimental to the crop, and that crop turning potentially to seed just with the light leak. We also then like to look at the second aspect that we look at is light quantity. So when I say light quantity, essentially how much light you are providing to that plant. There is also, you know, a duration thing. You also have to look at duration. So when you're looking at a quantity of light, it's how many, we say, photons, how much light is going to be put onto that plant for how long in the day. That has a direct relation to how much yield, how much plant material, how large the flower or the buds, how large those can be. Obviously, your genetics plays probably one of the most important roles when it comes to influencing factors for yield. You do find that you'll hear growers say, In English, of course, you hear strains, cultivars, chemovars. So some of the terminology does vary depending on who you're speaking with. But when we're talking about a specific strain or a cultivar, the genetics will play a very specific role into that yield. Also, how much light that you're giving to that plant. Keeping in mind that cannabis cultivation is very high demanding, that it is a very, we say, synergistic, that one thing does relate to another. So how much light, and depending on that genetic and the requirements of that genetic, will have a little bit different of a temperature. And I think we'll talk a little bit about, having that control later on in some of the topics and what that can do to the quality of product. But before we get to that, the third thing when we're talking about light and the importances, we've covered, photo period and the importance of what photo period and inducing flowering. We talk about the quantity, how much light's going on to the plant. And I think one of the third things that is overlooked in some aspects is that light quality. So
Yeah.
what does that have to, what is the, color, physically kind of color of that light, as sometimes we see as humans. But plants see light a little bit differently. And reasons why the sun is kind of so great in an aspect, that the sun is there to provide a full range of benefits for so many different things, on the planet Earth, that there is a lot of, the sun provides things for us as humans and animals, and being able to visually see. And the way we see light's different than the way, a pollinator that's very important in agriculture, like a bee, sees UV light. So there's a lot of aspects of the sun that not necessarily, I don't say is not necessarily needed for the plant, but that's what's led to that quality of light is very important. And where LED lighting and looking at LEDs or LED lampa and looking at controlled environmental aspect has had such a valued impact on agriculture production, especially cannabis. So those three things, we love to talk about the importance of, photo period, light quantity, and light quality, and how LED and LEDs can provide that for the farmer and can provide that for your production facility. And and I think I really wanted to touch on it, that of course that, LED lighting, there is an upfront cost that's involved with, of course, when you're looking at these facilities, and these indoor facilities can start to become very pricey, because you're looking at HVAC, your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And when you're looking at really humid conditions, in some of these parts that can grow some very high quality flower, that post harvest is very, very important. And also looking at LED lighting, that upfront cost, there's savings that you're going to save more on the back end. And I think with Mexico, in looking at electrical infrastructure, that I believe that LED lighting will have to be a consideration for indoor controlled environmental agriculture when we're looking at indoor production in greenhouses, just due to electrical infrastructure and the impact that cannabis production has on the electrical plant that might be powering that whole community. So that starts to be a lot of considerations that I think that people will need to look into, that although it is a higher cost involved with going with LED lighting versus your traditional lighting, that there are more benefits that you're going to see in the back end of operating.
So how Heliospectra helps growers to set up a facility?
Yeah, I mean, we bring a team of experts. That's the one thing we do provide our customers, is that support. Before we do, bring an expert like myself, that has, commercial cannabis experience in setting up grow facilities. We really like to work closely again with, our customers, their specific engineer, their HVAC partners, whether they have that or whether we bring that recommendation. We do, give some recommendations when it comes to some of the design aspects of your flowering rooms and sizes. But really, we're looking to bring a high quality lamp and, an expert team to be able to support you in any of these processes, and working closely with them. We do focus really heavily on, that lighting, but we do find that, light has a large role and plays a large role in the quality aspect when it comes to your cannabis production.
I see. Right. So, Ryan, you know that cannabis has thousands of cultivars or strains. So, tell us a little about how do you start and set up different rooms, and the necessities that you need to consider about that when you are growing in different rooms, because same is not the cannabis is not the same. So you need to establish difference between strains, terpenes, different aspects of the plant.
Yeah, it's another $1 million question, as we say. What genetics? What do I grow? Um, it's quite, market driven, and when I mean market, your customers, your business plan, uh, all of these things need to align, exactly. What are your production numbers that you're looking to achieve? How many grams? How many kilos are you looking to produce for your specific market? That will start to influence what genetics that you're starting to look for. I mentioned that genetics is and strains is one of the key factors to, production numbers, or when, focusing on yield and how much, biomass of flower. Are you looking for smokable, smokable flower? That's one consideration. Are you looking for extractos? And in extraction, are you looking at, a combustible or smokable extract, or are you looking at a kind of a consumable, and, more of a soluble, and basically where you can eat it and an edible? So sometimes that will start to dictate, again, what genetics that you're looking for. When you're looking at the, smokable, um, smokable flower, or the high quality, consumer market, you start to look at what we say is trending or popular. And that's a little bit tough to understand. What popular is today probably won't be popular tomorrow or in a few months. Geographically, that can dictate what you start to grow. We always you kind of break down cannabis into two main categories, really three. You have the very common indica versus your sativa. And now we have this hybrid, which we find
Yeah,
most strains is hybrid anyways.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, you're right.
But you can find that, in some of these regions of Mexico, say in a more of a tourist type region, that they might be looking for these genetics and strains that they might not get in their market in the US or Canada. And cannabis, they might be looking for this sativa, Panama Gold, or these more exotic type sativa strains, because it's just culturally, I would say the consumer market has been educated that, closer into these equatorial and jungle type regions that you get more of these sativa leaning hybrids. And that could be maybe what your business model is set up on. That it might be targeting, these tourists who are looking for, this sativa based, because that's what they have been educated, in consuming and understanding. But I think that those trends always start to change. Uh, Obviously, your space design, indicas tend to have a shorter flowering time. And so that can typically give you more harvest per year. And that can start to dictate whether you're growing, an indica, like an OG Kush. I've always gravitated, what I say, towards these OG, various OG varieties, what we say elite or clone only. That's a quicker flowering time. Or are you looking for, we find, rosin, and you extract those in rosin production, particularly due to the high quality of extracts and consuming that can do for the consumer. And we see the strains called GMO,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah, and GMO can take anywhere from an 11 week to 12 weeks of flowering time. So your facility design, maybe you have a small space that you've dedicated towards these long flowering plants in sativa, and you have only a small space that's dedicated because you have another larger space that can turn over, in 8 weeks. It can harvest, fill that space back up, and then go. So the strains can definitely, it's definitely a tough question to be able to answer, and regulations will start to dictate, where these can start to come from. A lot of the times with, we have what we say a one-time entry where we can bring in at one time. Again, this depends on where you're at geographically, but here in the US, you have one time to bring in these genetics that then you can legally put into your computer database tracking system. And I do find that most other countries have a similar tracking system to the seed to sale. So compliance is a word that, if you've not, have heard it, compliance, you'll hear quite
absolutely.
a bit in the regulated cannabis space.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. So we have several questions from the audience, and I ask the audience please to send us these questions to the question panel. So first one is, Ryan, how long should the photo period should be?
Can you repeat that question again?
Yes. How long should the photo period should be?
How long the photo period should be?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. We do have, they are again in English, but we do, if you go to Heliospectra, excuse me, sorry about that. If you go to heliospectra.com, we do have the Growers Center, and a great resource, not only for cannabis but for also food production. We do focus heavily on even ornamental growth and food production at Heliospectra. We do have some previous webinars that takes a really in-depth dive of the really specifics of light. We do have a grower's guide that takes an even deeper dive as far as what the different, say, colors of light, and what, when we talked about the photo period, the quantity and quality, that can really start to shed the light onto some of those topics. But in general, for the vegetative period, and that's when we're talking vegetative, we're really talking the before flowering, and also mothers, because we do have typically we find a vegetative room, a flowering room, a space for mothers in your production facility, and clones, which clones is obviously a little bit smaller of an area. But for the vegetative or the mother area, we recommend 18 hours of light on and 6 hours of light off. You can go up a little bit higher. You can go 24 hours, but we don't typically recommend that when you're utilizing lead lamp rods, just due to the plants will go to sleep naturally. They just go to sleep with the lights on. And if you know, as a human, that's never really fun for anybody, not really comfortable. So we do recommend 18 hours of lights on and uh, 6 hours of light off. The photo period for flowering is essential that you get a longer or equal dark period. So for the most part, we find that growers will have their lights on for 12 hours and then they have their lights off for 12 hours. That's because then every day that light turns on at 8 a.m. and it turns off at 8 p.m. or vice versa. And then you can build, systems. Within these commercial production facilities, you have employees. You have what we call SOPs, or standard operating procedures. And that's something why it's important to bring a head cultivator on, because they'll start to implement. They have very specific, I have very specific SOPs when it comes to cultivation that these employees also need to follow, because it does take a team of people. So that's very important, that the 12 hours of on, but most important, that 12 hours of dark. That cannabis, we say, is light hungry. It means it does like a lot of light. It's, why Mexico is prime for, greenhouse cultivation. The light requirements are pretty close to the same as tomato production. And we do know that, Mexico is the leading producer of tomatoes pretty much in the world, and definitely,
Yeah, Sinaloa.
Yeah, I mean, I think they say 2 out of every 3 tomatoes that we eat, here in the U.S. is produced in Mexico. And so knowing that the light conditions are the same, that definitely sets up Mexico very well for these really large greenhouse facilities for cannabis production.
I see. Yes, absolutely. So, second question, Ryan. If I am starting with a cultivation, which wavelength would you recommend to use for all the stages of the plant?
That's, again, I would say definitely download our grower's guide when it comes to cannabis lighting. We have not only myself, but we do have other experts that have lended, some of their knowledge when it comes to the specifics of, what are the different wave bands of light that, can influence growth. I've always taken a very simple approach to some of the research when it comes of understanding the influence of light. And you look at, and I think we talk about this in the grower guide, in these seasonal shifts. And the reason that the seasonal shifts and the way the earth tilts provides essentially different colors of light to that plant at different stages. So understanding that, in the spring environment, and the sun's going to be more directly up above, there's less filtrations from being at an angle. That's going to give you, and I don't want to get too in depth, especially, in English and talking, but you are getting a higher blue amount of light in the spring conditions, just due to the way that sun is above. So when you are looking at, mimicking these outdoor conditions, these seasonal shifts, which is very important to the production of fruit and flowers, that we're really kind of mimicking this outdoor spectral shift with cannabis production. So at Heliospectra, we have several different spectrums that allows that grower, again, to kind of have more of a spring-like day in their vegetative room compared to their flowering room, which is going to have a little bit more of a deeper red type spectrum, which red's going to promote, fruiting and flowering and the actual biomass for that product. So we really are looking to, taking those perfect conditions outdoor And that's really what we talk about with controlled environmental agriculture. We take those perfect conditions, that one day that's perfect outside, whether it's in the spring, in the veg, and then we try to mimic it in our vegetative type rooms. And now we have equipment and controls that allows the grower, myself, to be able to control all those parameters. And then understanding that, we provide, with our Vega lamp in our Mitra, we provide a higher blue that growers would utilize in the veg area. And knowing that blue light promotes a short, squatty plant, and then understanding that in the flowering room, we will spec our Lyra Mitra lamp if they're looking at the Mitra series, understanding that that lamp has a little bit more red light, which promotes flower development. Both of these lights are very white visually to the eyes, to the human eyes, but understanding that our eyes see things different than what plants see. So understanding, what then drives that plant to flower. I like to say at Heliospectra, we really believe that the far red wave band is essential for flowering production, whether it's cannabis, whether you're flowering, tomatoes and looking for fruit production, that plants naturally have geographically grew up, and evolved with far red in their atmosphere. And especially in the fall when these plants are becoming more mature and again fruiting or flowering, we're looking at flower production for cannabis. But the plants in that fall, there's more far red light, and that's been naturally produced in the environment, just the way the earth has tilted. And understanding that these plants need to have far red, and we find that we get shorter times to harvest. We find that we get denser canopies with having far red, and then particularly that, and it goes back to the quality of light in that flowering room, and that we can influence a broader terpene and cannabinoid profile, which really is what we're really looking at. The plant is kind of this, it's the vessel for what all of the secondary metabolites of what we want off of it.
Yeah. Oh, yes, it's very interesting the way that you manage light. This is an important question. Interesting. So if I had the three options to grow, indoors, outdoors, and hydroponics, which one do you recommend the most for beginners? It's interesting. And complex also. Depends on the money and other
Yeah,
things.
very complex.
Yeah.
I think that the best thing is just whether it's indoor versus outdoor. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you have to consider when it comes to, the first thing we're looking at, is kind of indoor versus outdoor versus greenhouse. It can just depend. Everything kind of depends. It's probably not the right answer that whoever it asks it's not wanting to hear. For myself, I started outdoor naturally. I mean, I came from a family that, grew agricultural for food production. And so naturally, that was a natural transition for myself, just because I understood how plants worked in an outside environment. But you're also then at the mercy of everything outdoor, that, bad weather conditions. Maybe it's not sunny for a month, and then you're not really going at a learning pace. So when you're going at a controlled environment of agriculture, you have more control, which allows you, I think, to limit the variabilities. So the amount of things that can not that be negative, you can start to limit those, which leans me towards an indoor or greenhouse type production. So it's not necessarily, it's not an easy answer. It does electrical allow for you to grow indoor? I think when I started to go in an indoor and start cultivating indoor, I started to truly understand what impacts cannabis. Different light, and how light is so important. But light is just one factor of many moving parts in an indoor. Your HVAC, higher light, plants require CO2. And that's something that in an indoor that you might have to understand, that you have to be able to, we say, supplement or get CO2 into that environment. So that's definitely tough to be able to answer. From a, I say from high consumer type quality products, and being a medical patient myself, of course I gravitate towards indoor cultivated cannabis. That's the method that I'm more comfortable with, and what I consult with, and what we can consult with heavily at Heliospectra. I'm also a big fan of soil. I know that hydroponic is definitely maybe can be achieved and done on a larger scale and commercial. So I do think that there is a place for hydroponic production, but we do find that that a lot of the high quality consumers look for an indoor and soil grown product.
Amazing. So for new growers, they may want to look into auto-flowering plants, and they will want to learn how to clone. And how would you address soil-based cultivation versus hydroponic techniques?
Yeah, well, I think that the two aspects when you're looking at hydro versus soil grown, and it's a little tricky because there's what we call soilless medium out there, which is pretty common. And when you go to these into grow stores, peat based, that most of the time, even if they say they're growing in soil, they are using what we call substrate. And different substrates can allow you to control different aspects. This growing is about control. So hydroponic, you're looking to, we say, an inert medium. So basically you are using a substance where the roots are growing into a substance that doesn't provide any nutrition. You are feeding, or you're watering, you're fertigating, you are giving everything. You are in control of that aspect. Now with soil, although you do have some control, you are looking for what we call biodynamic, or the diversity of the living organisms in that soil, and how that relates with your plant in that relationship. So although you can start to control what maybe you're feeding these living things like the bugs, and imagining the bugs in any of the soil outside, you are looking to control that aspect, between the two mediums. And I would say there's it's not a right or wrong. It is a business decision. And I think with also that's why it's important to working with cultivators, working with we are starting to see different organizational type groups, because I think it's really important to that I said before, Mexico has a very deep history of agriculture production. There's a lot of I would say very professional, and some of the top agriculturalists that there are, and some of these techniques can be combined into commercial cannabis agriculture. And being able to share these techniques, and having organizations and growers being able to share this knowledge will be very important for the success of the Mexican cannabis market.
Thank you, Ryan. So two more questions, and we are closing to the end of the webinar. So, what do you think about the potential of Mexico as a cannabis and hemp leader in the world?
Oh, sorry about that. I think it's set up very well. I think that anything with cannabis can be, tricky when it comes to regulations. I think that, we've worked with, quite a few growers in, Latin American regions from Colombia to Uruguay. And sometimes those regulational things take slow. I think that Mexico is set up just due with the amount of experience in the agricultural sector, that it's a potentially very, very large market and can be done actually right. I think bringing in the expertise, which I think that was important with these webinars and understanding, um, how it all relates together is where the success starts to lie. We talked about these really prime, great conditions outside, that you can grow, but if you get into your post production and harvest, you can potentially ruin a whole crop. So I think that the market will be there. I think that obviously Mexico has a large, a really draw on the tourist industry, and I think that that will be a really large segment of course, we found in Colorado, and I would say we apologize to the Cancuns and everything out there, but when we did regulate legal cannabis, we were the #1 tourist spring break destination, in I think it was 2012, and that those spring breakers usually are, again, going to other tourist destinations in Mexico. So when that doesn't come down there, that income stays in the U.S. So I think that the tourist market will be really large when it comes for recreational cannabis. So it'll be really interesting to see.
Thank you. And the last one, Ryan, is well, it's difficult to say, but how much money do you need to set up an indoor facility, an average indoor facility?
Ooh, the very tough question, and one that I don't want to really scare off anybody.
But it's important to talk about that. Yeah.
It is. It just depends on size. We find that in a commercial, because you're paying for the regulations. If you're
Yeah.
looking to be sustainable for a year with employees, the production cycle of cannabis, it could be up to 3 months or longer, in a short time.
Absolutely.
So you're paying bills and all of this. We see that most investments will go anywhere between $1 to $2 million USD, for the
Sure.
start, for that maybe initial year of operation. That is let's say, a fairly decent and larger size operation. Anybody you can cultivate. I mean, commercial cannabis production can vary in sizes. I would say do the right thing. Go with equipment that's going to last, that's going to work with you. I would say invest in LEDs. It is a larger upfront cost, but the more that the grows are going to take up a lot of electricity. That causes a lot of strain on the electrical grid, which we know that Mexico, and frankly a lot of places in the world, I mean, and even in the U.S. and different rural parts, has issues and problems with getting clean electricity. So making sure that you invest in that right equipment at the very beginning is so important, and calculating that into your budget. I always say, if LEDs isn't what you're looking at, I think you need to reevaluate your business plan, to see how that can be included, because it's going to have such an impact, not only on your bottom line for cost of production, but it has a direct impact on the quality of crops,
Absolutely.
that you're going to be producing. So making sure that, we always say, whatever your budget is, take that and times it by 2. Then you might be good.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. So thank you very much, Ryan, for your time, for this exciting and amazing conversation with you. I hope we can have you here in Mexico, traveling to these places with the potential of growing cannabis in the Pacific coast and other places. It's really amazing to have this conversation. Take care, and I hope I see you soon.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, Jorge. I really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody who's joined the webinar. Say, make sure to check out heliospectra.com. Feel free to reach out to myself or any of our team. Happy to answer any of your questions that you might have and help you along the way. And check me out at Rostagrow OG on Instagram. And make sure you support all your fellow local cultivators out there and look for all of those resources. I know that I've spoke with some people in Chiapas and San Cristobal that, you know, people are starting to organize. So I would say definitely get involved with some of those groups.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the audience. Thank you, Jorge, Araceli. Thank you very much for your time, Sarah, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Adios. Ciao.